Hi everyone, it's Yvette Blowitz from SPAITGIRL.com and welcome to the Spirit Girl Talk Show. I'm super excited to be here with you today and with our very special guest, Jennifer King Lindley, who is health and wellness writer and also the author of Find Your Joy. She's written for numerous magazines, including the Oprah Magazine, Parents, Martha, Stewart Living, Good Housekeeping, Health, Family Circle, and many more. So, Jennifer, welcome to the Spirit Girl podcast show and welcome to our global audience. I'm so joyful and happy that we're here today having this conversation. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm also joyful to be part of this conversation.
You know, I'm an absolute fan of your work. You've been a writer for over 25 years and really specialized in health and wellness, psychology, mindfulness, happiness, joy. And I absolutely love Find Your Joy. And that's the real reason I wanted to share you on the Spirit Girl podcast show, because I just feel that, first of all, the color of your journal is this beautiful feel-good blue, and you're wearing that.
Yes, I'm trying to look joyful.
Yeah, and just the everything in there is so beautiful, from mindfulness. Before we dive into Find Your Joy, are you happy to tell our listeners a little bit about yourself?
Oh, I would love to. Yeah, so I am, as you mentioned, I write mostly for magazines and websites, and my focus is self-care, wellness, health. And I got my start a couple of decades ago writing for a magazine called New Age Journal, which has unfortunately since folded. But this was a couple of decades ago, and we wrote about stuff that is now mainstream: the mind-body connection, meditation, organic food, ecology. All this stuff was considered sort of woo-woo back then, and now it's completely mainstream. So that was a fantastic preparation for what I'm doing now. And then after that, I was there for about 10 years. After that, I edited Dr. Andrew Weil's self-healing newsletter. And he's a Harvard-trained MD, a specialist in integrative medicine, and was one of the forerunners concerned about integrative medicine, how chronic conditions particularly can be treated through alternative means. So again, I feel like I was sort of on the cutting edge of that stuff back then. I moved to Indiana. I'm in South Bend, Indiana now from Boston, which is not exactly a hotbed of publishing. But because everything's remote now, I'm able, for the past decade or so, I've been a freelance writer, writing for magazines on these same topics, and continuing to learn and grow through doing that.
You truly are like one of the pioneers of writing. And why do you love writing so much?
I was thinking about that just general idea when I was writing this journal. And I don't know about you, but did you keep a journal when you were younger?
Yeah, I had a little diary, like those old-fashioned diaries where you had a little lock and key, and you could lock it up so that your sisters or no one else could read it. And I actually do a lot of writing and journaling, and really old school with the pen and the paper, and I find that very therapeutic. And I'm a bit like Oprah Winfrey in a sense, where I can go back even 10 years ago and look at thoughts and feelings, and I'm very big on writing, and I feel that's really allowed me to discover more of who I am and figure out what's going on within. So I like to go within instead of going out to figure out what's going on with me. So yeah.
Well, we were probably writing in journals at the same time, because I've always kept a journal, and for me it's about putting one's life on paper lets you have a little distance from what's happening, which I have always found to be good therapy. Also, I get a lot of joy from rereading my journals and thinking, I was worried about that, or I'm the same person that I was. So having sort of a paper trail about your life is wonderful. I also think that I've interviewed people who study narrative therapy, which is like the benefits of writing your story down. And we are storytelling creatures. We like to feel that our lives make sense. We like to feel that our stories have a beginning, middle, and an end. And when we do, we feel like we have a purpose or a why, and it's not just random things happening to us. We're shaping our story. As I say in the Find Your Joy book, we're both the narrator and the main character. So in writing down your story or your thoughts, you have a chance to sort of take on agency and decide how you want your story to be told. All that stuff is super interesting. As a magazine writer, I love interviewing people about their expertise, getting to hear their enthusiasms and learning from them about things like awe and self-compassion and purpose. Interviewing people and learning from them is just a really great way to, for me to grow. But also, when you have to write about it afterwards, you have to understand it. You can't fake it. So it's sort of like school for me. I have, in writing about the subjects I report, I have to kind of master them.
Yeah, because in your Find Your Joy, you actually include self-compassion, awe, like the wonders of awe, gratitude. Like, you have included so much psychology research in it. And I really love that aspect of it. So whilst we have exercises to do and prompts, you also include the research behind it. Was that so important? Because your book is based on positive psychology research.
Mm-hmm.
But can you tell me more about when you were writing Find Your Joy, why you felt so compelled to do an exercise and then to include the positive psychology research behind it also?
Great question. Originally, this book was going to be called Lift Your Mood, and I was approached by Hearst, the publishers, to write a book of exercises to help people feel better who maybe are coping with anxiety, depression. Over the years as a writer, I have done a lot of writing on positive psychology, and as you mentioned, awe and self-compassion, purpose, finding your strengths. All of these things I'm fascinated by, and they're not fringy at all. Like, there's researchers at the University of Pennsylvania, Harvard, that are now studying how do you do these things and what's the proper dose, what's the proper intervention to use these to actually elevate mood. So I thought that would be a really great focus for a guided journal, using the expertise and research at these institutions to have people be able to execute this in their own life.
I love how the title is Find Your Joy, because it really resonated with me that you could be having a really flat day, a down day, or not feeling happy, but there was a way through to find your joy. So I feel that it's really joyous and happy and really feel good. But I also feel that the rituals in there are like, because they are backed by science and research, they're not like hocus pocus or woo woo. And I felt that really cemented in the reason, like, okay, you're going to practice, as an example, loving kindness, which I love that practice you included, a Buddhist mindfulness practice. But I just love how you integrated the science, the research, but then the actionable practice of actually how to do it. So yeah, that to me is great.
I considered that my job, to interview these experts, understand what they had found, and then translate that into stuff that you could actually sit down and do. And I was really excited by positive psychology, because traditionally psychology was interested in how can we not be depressed? How can we not be anxious? And certainly that's important. Certainly I've benefited from that. But positive psychology's focus is, how can we go beyond that? How can we go beyond just not feeling bad, but how can we be our best selves? How can we thrive? How can we flourish? And Martin Seligman at the University of Pennsylvania was one of the original pioneers in this field, and I followed his work and others. And the idea that we don't have to just wait around for happiness to happen to us. We don't have to wait around until everything's fine and there's no stress and life is perfect, and then we'll sort of discover it like a bag of gold at the end of the rainbow. In fact, we have agency. We can go out and find it. That I thought was a really empowering message.
You literally empower the reader when it comes to that you have the power to create your own happiness. You have the power to create your own joy. And you can do this by these practices, and it's a tool. So it's just such an empowering find your joy message that even in a global pandemic, we still have the power to find our joy.
Well, and I would also add that I was an English major, so I do close reading, but the Your Joy is in there because I view this as sort of a sampler of practices from positive psychology that are well-researched and founded, but not everything's going to click with everybody. Like, you might not be a gratitude journal type, but you might feel like, yes, I need to connect with other people more, or I really need to look at and acknowledge my strengths. So this is meant to sort of have users or readers go through, kind of get an overview of the field of positive psychology, and then see what works for them. What's your joy? Like, what's your route to joy? It's not going to be the same for everybody.
What about if someone was tuning in now and they haven't had an opportunity to look at your journal, but they're probably like, wow, I need to get this journal, Find Your Joy, so I'll make sure I include the link. But what could be one practice that they could try to find their joy?
One of the chapters that I think is pretty accessible and pretty easy to try is on awe, AWE. And there's been a good amount of research interest on awe lately. And awe is, we all know the feeling. It's when you see something, you get goosebumps, and you go. It could be, seeing the Sistine Chapel or seeing the Grand Canyon, but it doesn't have to be. It can be, as one of the researchers said to me, go out and look at an anthill and imagine how much communication and cooperation is going on there, right? And that's like 1 inch of your yard. Or go out and look at a leaf and see how it's changed from day to day. So finding ways to get more awe in your life is one way to, I think, really begin to find more joy, because it makes you sort of step out of your day-to-day routine, your kind of rat maze of thinking, and step back and say, wow, we're really surrounded by miracles, and they can be small, but it makes you see the world in a different way. One of the researchers I talked to said, if you go on an awe walk every day, you can take the same path, but it's almost a form of mindfulness. It's looking very closely at, trees, flowers, what the birds and bees around you are doing. And if you go out thinking, I'm going to go look for awe, if you go out with that filter, those glasses, you will begin to see sort of what a miraculous world is around you, and it puts your own stuff in perspective. It's kind of like if you've ever flown over, you're flying an airplane and you're looking down at this huge vista of clouds. You're not like, oh shoot, I had a typo in my last piece. You're like, wow, this is a remarkable world I'm living in. And so finding ways to cultivate more awe, I think, is one easy place to start in finding more joy in one's life.
I love that, because first of all, I'm in awe of your beautiful blue eyes. I was like, now that's awestruck. Everybody go to the SPAITGIRL YouTube channel, because Jennifer literally has these beautiful blue eyes, and I'm in awe, like, how was this created? And it's interesting you should say this, because I'm doing a lot more research in the awe section, because knowing that it's becoming its own new trend. And I'm going to be interviewing an author who's written a book, Awestruck. I did an awe walk yesterday. And you're not going to believe this, because you have awe in your book, Find Your Joy. I did an awe walk, but I was like, wow, the sky is so beautiful and blue. Now, I've done that walk, I have to say, it feels like 1,000,000 times, but I've never really paid the attention to really look at the color of the sky and be really awestruck by it, or feel the awe or the wonder of how can the sky be that so beautiful and blue. I noticed so many things that I've just walked that path before, headphones on, listening to podcasts, and just walked past all of this awe. So I love how you shared that practice, and I love how it's in Find Your Joy.
Yeah. No, that's really interesting. And what you're sharing with me reminds me of, what I've heard from a lot of researchers. We, for survival, we are programmed to go out and look for the wolf. Look what is threatening. Look at the dangers or the anxieties out there. And so being focused on things like, I'm going to go out and purposely focus and hunt for amazing things, is an opportunity to rewire our brains. So we're not just looking about the next problem around the corner. We're now seeing the world in a different way. And that's helped me because I can be a worrier, to sort of retrain my brain to think about, okay, so yeah, there's things to worry about. But there's also a huge amount of stuff to appreciate out there. I'll have to listen to your awe podcast because I love that topic.
Yeah, when it's on, I'll let you know. I'll send you a link. But it's really interesting, Jennifer, because obviously before the pandemic, I am in total awe of being in a little seaplane and flying over the islands of the Maldives, and just the color of the water is turquoise and it's crystal clear, very much like your Find Your Joy book, very much like your shirt, and very similar to your eye color. And I thought to myself, when we can't travel to these places because international travel's completely closed out of Australia, I thought to myself, well, and it prompted me with your journal, how can I find this awe in my day? Like, I can't right now go to the Maldives, but how can I find it in my day? How can I bring that love for that color, that turquoise and that crystal clear and that blue that I love into my day? So thank you for sharing that in your Find Your Joy.
Well, and one of the awe researchers I talked to said, in speaking to your point, it can be as simple as, instead of going, if you're commuting, back when we were commuting, and we'll be again soon, hopefully, instead of just driving home, maybe take a detour and go look at a vista. Go look at the sun setting on a river on your way home, something like that. I mean, it's not, you don't have to, again, go to the Grand Canyon or be totally blown away. It's just making opportunities in your life to step back and see the world in a fresh way. So it sounds like you're on the right track with your approach.
Yeah, and what about, there are days when we feel terrible. Life isn't always going to plan. How can we allow happiness? So if life isn't always going to plan, how can we look at this day if we're feeling terrible and having a terrible day?
That's a question that is very dear to my heart, because you write a book about Find Your Joy. I don't want to give people the impression that you have to be joyful all the time, because we all know that's not what life is. That's certainly what this year has taught us, that things are not going to be joyful all the time. One of the researchers I talked to at Cornell University studies purpose. He told me this about the idea of purpose, which is, roughly translated, why do you get up in the morning? And a lot of the blue zone countries where people live to be 100, they all have a sense of purpose. And if we spend too much time trying to be happy, smiley face happy, unicorns, rainbows, we might miss out on that. But purpose is about finding your why, and then using that to kind of steer your ship. This Cornell researcher said, if you have a purpose, it's like having a lighthouse. Even when the ocean is rocky and there's problems, you still know you're going in a direction. And what I also loved about his idea about purpose was, it doesn't have to be curing cancer. Now, if that's your purpose, then you go. I mean, that's wonderful. But it could be creating beauty around you, or being a great mom, or whatever is important to you. But when you get up in the morning, you say, I'm going to do this. This is my purpose. that is very sustaining, and it's probably more enduring than just trying to be happy and joyful all the time. So I've taken that to heart. Even if every day isn't wonderful, then it can be a chance to express our purpose. So I'm wondering if you've thought about purpose. It seems like your podcast, I get a strong sense of purpose from your podcast.
Yeah, I thank you for sharing that, and also for asking me that question, because I feel that when the global pandemic hit, for me, I just kind of went, okay, so I can no longer travel international. I can no longer be in the Maldives and show everybody around these incredible luxury spas and wellness, and for them to meet the team. But I really felt a sense of purpose. Like if I'm feeling really stressed out, really anxious, I was in my first lockdown waiting for my coronavirus results. And I just really felt, wow, if I feel so overwhelmed, maybe everybody else does. And then I sat there and I thought, well, how can I help and serve others? That was the question. And that's when I got the idea. Interview people, find out how they're coping, what self-care rituals they're doing, and what makes them feel good, and how they're managing this complete, utter chaos and mess that's playing out right around the world. So my purpose is to help other people to feel good from within, to learn ways that can make them feel better through the good days and the bad days, but also to inspire and empower them to practice self-care, and to also know that it's okay to feel overwhelmed, to feel anxious, to have down days or a sea of emotions, and it's okay, and that they're not alone. And I felt, I really feel driven. So even when my mum sadly during COVID-19 had a seizure and went into a coma, that was from pneumonia, but it was a very unsettling time and a very stressful, emotional time. But I still kept that purpose of helping others. So my purpose is to serve and help others. So instead of going, oh, poor me, poor me, poor me, it's all about me. Oh, look at my poor life. Oh, this is what's happening. I also put into perspective that there were other people doing it way tougher than me, that on that day had sadly lost a loved one, whether it was through COVID-19 or whether it was through an accident or terminal cancer or whatever it might be. There would be someone, always someone doing it tougher than me. And I feel that always keeps everything into perspective. And when I took the focus off me, and when I always put it on to we, I just feel so grateful and fulfilled. Like yesterday, I received this gratitude letter. A full page, actually from one of listeners and podcast and book club members. And it was just so incredible when I found out what he had learnt through the podcast and how much he has grown as a person. And it's kind of like those little moments where you don't expect to even get a thank you, or you don't even know sometimes with your work, and you probably can resonate with this, Jennifer, that it's touching so many and it's helping so many. But I truly believe purpose, having a higher purpose beyond just myself, like not creating content just because I look good. Just because it's all about me. I feel that purpose is so important, and especially during the pandemic and well beyond.
No, that's well said. And I think that's really, don't you find when you get up with that purpose, even though it's not the main motivation, you do feel better? And I know from listening to some of your other podcasts, you're big on self-compassion. And I've had the chance to interview Kristen Neff. I don't know if you've interviewed her before, but
I would love to have her on my podcast show. I'm such a fan of her work.
Reach out. When I talk to her, that she focuses on is common humanity. And I interviewed her for this journal, but the idea that when we view our struggles as something that everyone is going through, that can become a moment of connection and not of isolation. Because if you think, as you were saying, like, oh, everybody else is going to, having a great time and having a party and everything's great and I'm the only one who's suffering, that's very isolating. But if you think of all the people that are going through what you're going through or something like it, you feel connected to something bigger than yourself. And that's also a great consolation.
I have a saying that kindness is beauty. So when I think of the young kid that doesn't even have fresh drinking water, or just feel that when you just shift your focus on others and other people and serving and really it just fills your own cup up. So talking about filling your own cups up. Now, as a health and wellness writer, you obviously write so much about health and wellness and self-care, and you were way ahead of this pop trend. Like, it's just become on trend, especially over the last year. But what are your own self-care rituals, Jennifer?
Oh, well, I could go on and on, but one of the chapters in Find Your Joy is on reconnecting with nature and the natural world. And right now for another magazine, I'm doing a piece on forest bathing. Have you heard of forest bathing?
It's becoming huge, like a really great topic everyone wants to learn about. So share more. That would be amazing.
Okay. Well, the idea is that the premise is that we have become so removed from the natural world and being out in nature, hearing the sounds of nature, seeing the natural world, feeling it on our skin. Instead, we're spending like 7 hours a day on our devices, and 99% of human evolution was spent being integrated in the natural world. In Find Your Joy, I have a chapter on reconnecting with nature, and for me, that's my biggest self-care thing. It's not just forest bathing is going and immersing yourself in sort of a world away natural setting for several hours. And that's fantastic, but we can't always do that. So for me, if I'm feeling like the stress level's rising, I know enough to say, okay, I'm going to go for a WALK. I don't want my dog to hear. She's right here. So I'll take her for a WLK. We'll just look at the trees. We'll just soak it in. I'll do that 2 or 3 times a day when I'm reaching, like the boiling point, and it totally calms me down. And also this morning here in South Bend, I'm part of a community garden. I do peas and cukes with other people that love gardening. I spend a couple hours getting really filthy and weeding and chatting with people. So that's like a twofer. It's human connection. It's, getting reunited with how we grow our food. And that also is super self-restorative to me. So like for me, because I spend a lot of time, this is my office, it's my dining room, but it's also my office. I spend a lot of time like typing away on my computer. So if I'm going to do self-care, I want to be up and out and interacting with people, interacting with animals. And I also this year, as a form of self-care, I'm in the city here, but I got 3 backyard chickens. So I'll go out if I need a break, I'll go out and see what the chickens are doing. They'll talk to me. I'll see if there's any eggs. All that stuff for me is, I know when I come back after doing that, I feel a lot better. So again, like I said earlier, Find Your Joy sort of gives a palette of choices about what might be restorative. And for me, it's like getting up and connecting with animals and nature, plants. That's what totally tops me up. So what did you do yesterday? I know it's super early there, but what did you do yesterday to find your joy?
Thank you for asking. I have to say that I love how you said WALK so that your dog actually wouldn't know what you were talking. Like, otherwise your dog might think you were going to go on a WALK.
And there'd be some barking.
Yeah. And I love the communal gardening because I've recently, as you know, interviewed Sue Stewart Smith about her book, The Well Gardened Mind, the benefits of gardening and nature and connection, like social connection. So for me, yesterday, my self-care rituals very much in the morning. I actually have 2 cups of water with a lemon, fresh squeezed lemon with some pink Himalayan salt. I got this technique or self-care ritual actually off Dr. Dana Cohen, the author of Quench. And she just talked about the importance of drinking water. Yes, drinking water first thing in the morning to flush the system, get toxins, get a little bit of minerals, and it's a great way. I always, you know what, I never sit in a chair in the morning. I go straight to my yoga mat and I'll sit on the floor like a little kid, and I'll do some mindfulness practice, so some breathing and just either a little mindfulness meditation, really just kind of just getting used to sitting by myself and just tuning into my breath or noticing the sounds. Or I practice gratitude always, journal, of course, pen and paper. And I'm very much like you. Then I've got to get outside, and I love to go for a walk in nature. I just love being outdoors because I'm too, like you, spend a lot of time sitting behind a computer, writing or editing, sitting down and being inside, which I find isn't healthy for my headspace. So being outside. So I have so many beautiful walks, but the one I did yesterday is a combination of along like the ocean, but then in amongst trees. I even go past this very spiritual, like Aboriginal meeting point, which to me is just so beautiful. And it's really in amongst nature. And then you have the advantage of other people walking with the cute little dogs. And I'm also making sure that on my walk, that when I walk past someone, I say good morning. Because I really want to bring back that old school human connection. I feel that I was raised, if you walked past someone in the morning, to be polite and say good morning, and that would be a form of connection in the community, and it was a really nice and friendly thing to do. So many people do not do this.
Oh, okay.
Many people are kind of like, the older people are like so onto this. They're like, yeah, this is what we know. And they get really surprised when I say good morning. But generally some people, you know, will be in the zone and have their earphones on, and that's fine. Or kids are like, why is she saying good morning? Who is that? We don't know her. She's a stranger. Why did you say hello to the stranger, Mum? But I just love the human elements because it just gives you a great diversity. But I'll tell you what I saw yesterday, which was super cute. There were kids fishing, and they had their little fishing rods out, and these two boys must have been about 10 and 12. And then they came up and I said, you know what, it's so great to see you fishing. Like, unbelievable. Here are these kids fishing. And they said to me, yeah. I said, because I said, otherwise you could just be at home on computer games. And you know what they said? Oh, that's no good for you. Oh, no, that's no good for you. And I was like, wow, these two kids are so in tune with what's good for their mental health. And
that's very helpful.
Yeah, I said to Mum, it's so empowering and so inspiring and hopeful that kids at their age are learning, if they are in nature, connecting with their friends without their mobile phones, and actually doing an activity that they can feel better mentally. And that was my awe moment where I was so hopeful.
Yeah. Oh, that's
so there are only a few things.
Sounds like you've got a lot of places to experience all along the way. If you're walking to an ocean and a spiritual ground, and then seeing people. Yeah, I've interviewed Gillian Sandstrom from London. She does research on weak ties, but that's basically being kind to strangers, and it has all kinds of benefits, not just for you, but also it sort of creates an upward spiral, because the people you were greeting probably will be more willing to greet other people in the future.
Yeah. I often think about the elderly person, like if they were living at home by themselves, say their spouse has passed away, because we never know by looking at someone what's going on in their life. You never know, are they grieving a lost one? Do they live by themselves? So I'm really conscious when I see an elderly person by themselves. I might be the only person that day that actually acknowledged them and said hello. And to me, that is so important. And I feel that can you imagine a world where people walked past each other and said, good morning, hello, how are you? Like in the seas, I would love to run an
Yeah.
experiment. Imagine in New York City one day where people just did that, or in Hong Kong. Because I've been in Hong Kong where the little kids are on their device or people are so busy. And I've often wondered, imagine just for one day, but we can do that. We have the power to make the change, and it starts with us.
Yeah,
So
good point.
you've written a lot about resilience. So many of us are picking ourselves back up after a really tough year. Do you have any advice for those of us who are slowly re-entering normal life or the new norm?
Well, I think we're all trying to make sense of that. I know I am. And I think in speaking to experts, a few things about resilience stuck with me. One of them, and this is part of gratitude, but silver linings. It sounds kind of cliche, but it's honestly true. If you can think back about the past year, I mean, certainly there was really hard things. It was traumatic, but also were there any silver linings? Like in my case, my daughter lives in New York City, but she came home like for 3 months. She's 24, so she works full time. She came home and worked in this room with me, the dining room, just because nobody was vaccinated. New York didn't seem safe. So I got this bonus time with my daughter, which was fantastic. Another silver lining was, I think I struggled like a lot of us, like how will I cope with all this time alone in my own head? And I was always kind of afraid of that. But having spent a year spending a lot of time by myself, I thought, you know what, I can do it. I survived that. And I maybe even learned some things about it. So like looking back at the past year, I mean, certainly it's not trying to whitewash it, but did you show yourself any surprising strengths? And kind of taking some time to think about what strengths did I actually show during this difficult time that I could maybe use again, that I could, sort of have in my toolkit in the future. And for me, like just knowing that I'm a social person, but I can do okay with a lot of solitude, I think was a growing thing. And I interviewed Kim Schneiderman. I loved her. She wrote a book called Step Out of Your Story, about how to make your life into a story as a sort of healing thing. And she said, I love this. It stuck with me. Like you could tell the story of Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz as this poor girl, a house fell on her, a witch chased her, the bats came after her. Or you could tell a story, a young woman or, a girl was deposited in unknown land, but she made friends and they all used their strengths to triumph and return and learn stuff. I mean, that's a heroic story. Without whitewashing the past year, if you can tell yourself sort of a positive, even a heroic story about how you dealt with some very difficult times, that's great. Because like if you look at, like, I love to read novels too. I love novels, and novels are not like we all went to Starbucks and we got some coffee and it was really fun. Like that's not a good novel. A good novel is there was a huge problem. The person looked inside themselves, found something they didn't know was there, triumphed. I mean, that is what we want to read. And so if you can kind of think of your life as a story, and writing helps you do that, you have agency then in how you tell this story, and that can empower you going forward. So that definitely stuck with me when I think of resilience. And then another psychologist said to me, you can't control fate. Like we're all going to have terrible things thrown at us. But what you can do is learn to be adaptable. And like that's the most important thing you can be, is adapt to difficult circumstances, good circumstances. If you can be adaptable, then really the world will work out for you. So it was a chance to practice that, I think, in the past year. And again, like we were talking about self-compassion, Kristen, I think we also need to be self-compassionate. Like we're not all going to spring back to the barbecue. We went through a lot, and it's going to take us a while to get back to whatever new normal we think is important. And it's not a race, and it's not like you have to do these 10 things and keep up with everybody. It's really about what did you learn and how do you want to integrate that into your life and your priorities going forward, I think.
I love that. In your Find Your Joy, you actually include the part where you can write your story, and you include more about it and the research, psychology and the science behind it. But you're so right. I feel that it's been a massive self-development or personal development year for everybody. There's a very big spiritual leader in India, Sadhu. He talks about, wow, maybe we should do this every year where the whole world stays at home and has to focus on their own health and wellness. And he talks about how if we all even increased our health and wellness by 10% every year, that would be a great thing for humanity. But you're so right. It's been such an opportunity to either read books, which I got to take back up, like today, meet so many incredible people, to help and serve, to spend more time with family. I'm so grateful I'm not stuck over. Like, we still have so many Australians who are overseas and can't get back into the country.
Wow.
Because there's only a certain amount who can. So, and also grateful that I got the opportunity to choose when I was faced with many challenges with my mum's health, and I got to ask myself, right, how do I want to show up? So I got to be able to show up, and I chose with strength and grace. And I feel that we all got to step into, I say, our power, but where we all got to be leaders in some way if we chose to. And I got to learn this: focus on what you can do versus what you can't do. So that really was incredible for me, those few learnings.
Yeah, no, that's all you can do. And I think I wrote a piece for Oprah Magazine last winter on philosophical counseling. And that's when people are now going to philosophers to talk about their personal problem instead of just psychologists, because it gives them like the big picture. It's good for wrestling with like meaning of life and why. One of the Stoicism came up in the conversation, and the Stoics said, you can't control what happens to you. All you control is how you react and your attitude. And it sounds like that is the attitude you brought to your mother's illnesses. Just like, how am I going to, this is not what I would choose. What am I going to do? How am I going to think? How am I going to act? That's the only thing we have control over. And so like, that's the heroic thing to do, is decide how you're going to react when circumstances aren't what you want.
Jennifer, it's interesting, because you often think like, okay, you're getting back on your feet again. So rehabilitating mom, and she's feeling better, and we're taking her out for coffee, and we went to the library yesterday. But you get hit with something again, we got hit with some news that really totally blew us away, that she had this terminal cancer and palliative care would be the only option. And that really blew me out of the water. But I kind of thought, isn't it interesting that self-care rituals can keep you really at least grounded, or help you cope when you've got really stressful situations happening, and when things just pop up out of nowhere, that literally is like a tsunami that just wipes you out. Jennifer, I know that your mum's had her own health challenges as well in this ovarian cancer area. Like, have you found that self-care or being kinder to yourself, or just sort of taking the pressure off, I've got to do X, Y, Z, and go, maybe I one thing?
Well, in my mother's case, before the operation, the surgeon was operating for ovarian cancer. It ended up being benign. So I know, somewhat what you're going through. The circumstances are a little different. But for me, I think what really did help me was just thinking about, how am I going to show up for this? Am I going to impress myself with how strong I can be? But so that was part of it. But also I did, when I was visiting her, I was there for 2.5 weeks for the operation after. I did a lot of walks. Oops, I said the word walk.
The dog's time to go walking.
I was, again, I mean, it worked out okay, but it was very stressful at times. And I just knew, okay, I need to go to get fresh air, look around, put this in perspective. That's going to be my go-to for everything, just moving the body, getting a fresh perspective, for me, I know that's my go-to for sure.
It's interesting that's your go-to, because that was my go-to as well, where I really got to actually test my self-care rituals. Like, does this stack up? Like, it was really good during the good times, but now during the bad times, is this of benefit? Can it make me feel better? Can it make my mental health feel better? My thoughts, feelings? And I got to put it to the test. So I'm sure a lot of our listeners will resonate, where we had the opportunity to go, right, does this actually work? And in my case, like you, the walking and being in nature really has helped with really stressful situations.
You shared that one of your morning routines is to practice mindfulness. And I'm always like, I only practice mindfulness when I'm in a foxhole, like when I'm having a panic attack, then I want to learn mindfulness. So, and I was interviewing somebody yesterday who said, you know what, you need to practice mindfulness when everything's going well or better than well, because then you will be, you'll harness that ability. You'll be able to draw on it when things are difficult. So I thought that was a great point. I'm going to try to do it forward, but it sounds like you kind of made it a discipline before you really, really needed it. Whereas for me, I'm always like, oh, mindfulness, I'm supposed to do mindfulness.
I love your honesty too, because you are a writer about health and wellness. But it's so interesting, because even I thought about that the other day. I was interviewing another author, and she talked about colouring in. And I did the colouring in right when Mum was in the coma. But you know what? It's one practice I know that's really good for me, and I know I should do it every week, and I haven't. And I'm so determined now to introduce that into like the self-care Sunday, where I just sit and read a little book, or do a little journaling and do a little colouring in, because it's so beneficial. But it's funny. It's only when things go pear-shaped that we think, oh, we better do mindfulness practice. And so how I've overcome this, I've become super disciplined. There's an author called David Goggins, and he's written a book, Can't Hurt Me. But he was just an incredible journey of one of the toughest men in the world. And I kind of took his approach where, right, I've got to make my bed in the morning. And before I leave that door, I always practice. It's got to be minimum of 10 minutes, even if it's like a calm mindfulness meditation. But it's like, before I leave that door, I got to do it. So I've become so disciplined. No, and then
I want to do that too. My resolution is to, when things are okay, get better. Because I was interviewing for this forest bathing piece yesterday, a nurse who does mindfulness nature. And she said she's got to the point where she can lower her pulse intentionally. Like, she's so tuned into her body. She can, through just, going within and focusing on her body-mind connection, lower her pulse rate. And then I'm like, oh, wow, I should do that.
You'd be able to resonate with this, because as a writer, a storyteller, reading books, interviewing people, you're always thinking. You got to be thinking about the next piece, the next article, in your case, or for me, the next show. It's the next. So your mind actually is so creative. It's always thinking story. So your mindfulness practice, I tell you what, it's so incredible, because it takes you out of that thinking. And it's really a joy when you actually, I've found that longer I meditate, so I've now upped my meditation in the morning to about 25 minutes minimum. And I have found that the longer you do it, it's a bit like walking. If you only walk for 10 minutes, it's still great. But if you do that 25-minute walk, it's even better. So what I'm doing now is, like, even if I did 10 minutes in the morning, 10 minutes at lunch, or 10 minutes in the evening, I kind of can build up the minutes. But I'll have to tell you, I started literally with 1 minute.
I would be impressed by 1 minute.
Like 1 minute, and then I upped it to 5 minutes. So it is a gradual process, a bit like exercise.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you go in the whole hog of 30 minutes or trying to do a 1 hour mindfulness meditation practice, like
Mm-hmm.
I just discovered, forget it. I'm just going to start small. So that's my tip for all of our listeners.
Okay. Yeah, no,
Start
that's a good
small.
tip.
Jennifer, I could talk to you literally forever about Find Your Joy and your incredible career of the people you've interviewed, the researchers, the neuroscientists, the scientists, the authors, like so many people you've interviewed is phenomenal. And it's such an honor to have you on the show today and so grateful. But do you want to leave our listeners with a sample writing prompt to try on their own?
Yeah, thanks. I think that would be fun. So, this is something that I was writing about yesterday, so I thought I'd share it with people. The idea is sort of, again, like we've been talking about, you get so caught up in the to-do lists and the deadlines and the must-do, you can kind of lose track of who you are essentially and who you've always been. So, I would invite readers to, when they're not listening to this, spend some time writing about this, maybe 5-10 minutes. And I don't know about you and your journaling, but I like doing pen and paper rather than computer just because it's away from a screen. But imagine your perfect day when you were 10 years old. Kind of transport yourself back there. Like, what was a perfect day when you were 10? What were you doing? Who were you around? What were you feeling? What were you smelling? What were you seeing? Kind of get in a time machine back to that perfect day in childhood. And then, write about that for a while. And then ask yourself, what gave me joy about that? And what can I do to get some of that joy back in my life? Because a lot of times, like, we don't change that. We change a great deal, but also we don't change that much. And so looking back to like who you were as a child can sometimes help you get in touch with your dreams and what's really important to you. So I'd encourage readers to kind of get back in that space, trying to sort of inhabit it, write about it, think about what they love, what gives them joy. Because like a lot of times childhood joy is so unadulterated. It is pure joy. If you can get back there and say, if it was like we've been talking about, like when I was 10, I had a pony in my backyard in the tool shed. So I was at my happiest when I was around animals. So that's kind of informs me now, like how can I get some more animal energy in my day? So it might be like flying a kite or doing art or hanging out with your friends or reading in your secret cave. Any of those things that gave you joy, could you bring some of them back in your life? This prompt maybe helps people access that long ago part of them and see that you still sort of are familiar with that person.
I love that. The first thing that came to mind was when I was just a little kid and there was a photo taken of my brother and I, like a time capsule photo, but we were sitting on this table with lots of books and we were coloring in. So that's my sign that I've really got to take the coloring in up again because we were our happiest. And the most joy, like I was saying to you before I hit the record, I was like, yay, I'm going to be interviewing Jennifer King Lindley because she's written a book about Find Your Joy. And I was so joyful like a little kid because I was saying before we hit record, being around books, feeling books, writing with a pen and paper. My mum and I went to the library. We used to do it as a little kid going every Friday. And I was religiously always used to watch the Oprah Winfrey show and her book club and how she interviewed women and authors about their book and how they helped other people through their book. So I was just like this little kid, like joy, 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 joy. So yeah, I really believe go back to what makes you happy and tap into your inner kid because we often forget about that. But we can really feel so joyful by doing things we love. So thank you, Jennifer, for sharing that.
I was a big book reader too. I was one of those kids that had like a pile of books in my tent, and now I think sometimes like, oh, well, it's a Wednesday. I really shouldn't, it'd be kind of frivolous to read a novel. Whereas as like a kid, you could spend all day reading 5 books. And I'm trying to get back to this idea that it's not just about like achieving stuff and ticking things off. It's also getting immersed in those kind of worlds too. That's a valid thing to do.
Yeah, because you're on so many deadlines being in magazine, like strict deadlines and always doing, you have so many projects on the go. And we have come into this at the moment, we've been in a culture of doing, just being to find our own joy. Like sometimes there's been so much emphasis on achievement, that the achievement is what brings the joy. But what I loved about Find Your Joy is it's the practices, like the self-care practices you do, or the rituals, or the activities you do that brings you the joy. That's how you find your joy.
We also, I think, like one of the things I'm trying to believe more is we all deserve to feel joy. It's not something you get to do if you've done all your other 110 must do. It's part of being human, is finding the pleasure in life and the things that feed us, and not just like getting the most stuff done.
I love that.
Nobody's watching. Just circle back as we wind up there. When you shared about your purpose, which was using your own experience to help other people, I just interviewed a hospice chaplain for an article I'm doing, and she was fantastic. But one of the things she said was really like when people towards the end, what is important to them is their connections, their relationships with people, not like how much they got done or how much they made. It gets down to the very essential, like, I love you, I forgive you. What I have planted here will continue to grow. I think we can also, in our busyness, lose track of that. And I think like this past year, even though there's been more separation, we've also like realized how important connection is. It's essential.
Over particularly the last year, being very heavily involved in aged care, I've actually got to learn so much about end of life. Like, we know our start date, we don't know the end date. But the constant theme that people talk about at their end of life, sadly, is more about their family, the connections, the people. They either want to say, like you said, say sorry, forgive someone, or tell someone they love them so much. And for them feeling that is the most important. I'm yet to have one person who's ever said, oh my goodness, I haven't updated Instagram or Facebook today. Not one person. These elderly people have access to Facebook. They got technology, but not one person. So that made me really realize that as long as we're fostering connection with, say, like our mum or our dad, if you have that opportunity, and even if you don't have family, some of these elderly people have created a new family through either the activities officer or even through me, walking through the corridor. You can still find connection even if you're on your own. And it's actually the human connection is the one thing that is the most important thing, and their relationships, and that they've made peace or not. So it's fascinating that you're doing that piece and that research on that as well. Now, Jennifer, we will round this up. This is the reason why I called it a talk show, because I could talk to you forever. But how can we stay in touch with you after this podcast show?
First of all, thank you. I really enjoyed it. It felt like a very back and forth conversation. I learned a lot from you too. So thank you so much for having me. I have a website, jenniferkinglindley.com, where I post my stories and a link to my book. I just started an Instagram. I'm like a dinosaur lumbering onto Instagram. But on Instagram, I do post prompts, writing prompts and suggestions that are not in the book. So the people, if they were interested in what they experienced by reading the book and writing, if they want fresh prompts, I'm posting those there too. So those are probably the top two.
I can't wait to have you back on the show again, because I could seriously talk to you forever about Find Your Joy and all the research you do. It's absolutely incredible, your work. And to stay into writing and be true to yourself and your passion, and to actually be one of those early pioneers writing about all this, what was back then woo-woo, you know, back in the Oprah Winfrey days, holistic health and meditation and mindfulness, and some of these topics people thought was totally weird, totally off the planet, but it's becoming the new norm. But to stick with your passion for writing and contributing to these magazines and online websites, and way to go getting on the Instagram game. Like, Instagram's about sharing what you love, and that's really important during these times. But it's just been an absolute pleasure and honor. And thank you for creating Find Your Joy, because it is such a great book and journal. And I'll leave the link again for our podcast listeners so they can see. It's available on Amazon.com, like literally online bookstores, and Booktopia. A really, really beautiful feel-good book. If you do nothing other than look at the cover on a Self-Love Sunday, because it's Spirit Girl Self-Love Sunday here, you would just find your joy just by looking at the cover. So we can judge a book by its cover in this case. So Jennifer, thanks again.
Thank you. I enjoyed every minute.
Yeah, well, we'll say goodbye to Jennifer King Lindley, and just really want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart for all your support on the Spirit Girl podcast show. It truly means the world to me that you've been sharing the podcast, the books on the podcast, telling your friends and family. I really love that you're part of this conversation, and I truly hope it serves you well and helps you to find your joy. So be sure to subscribe, to leave a 5-star rating and review, and to tell someone you love to. And together, let's feel good from within.